Doctors can't save the billionaire's baby until the poor black girl did the unthinkable. Doctors and nurses hurried through the hallways, pushing trolleys filled with equipment, voices blending into a constant hum of urgency. Among the people waiting and rushing about, there was a tension in the air that seemed thicker than the morning fog. Something rare and alarming had happened in the neonatal ward, something that had shaken even the most experienced medical professionals. In a room bathed in the cold white light of sterile lamps, a newborn baby lay in an incubator. The infant's tiny chest rose and fell with difficulty, every movement seeming to demand more energy than the fragile body could provide. The monitors around the incubator beeped unevenly, sounding alarms that only intensified the worry in the room. Doctors in crisp white coats huddled near the incubator, faces lined with concern, whispering medical terms that even the most attentive listeners could hardly follow. The baby belonged to Samuel Hargrove, a billionaire whose name was known across the world. His wealth was enormous, his influence unmatched, and his lifestyle was one that many envied. But at this moment, none of that mattered. Samuel and his wife, Victoria, stood by the incubator, hands intertwined, eyes fixed on the tiny life before them. Their faces were pale, the kind of pallor that comes not from lack of sleep, but from a fear that refuses to be quieted. This was not a problem that money could solve, at least not yet, and the realization weighed on them like a heavy storm cloud. Doctors had tried everything. Specialized machines, rare medications, consultations from experts around the globe. They had thrown the full power of modern medicine at the baby, yet nothing seemed to work. Every procedure, every intervention, brought only brief moments of hope before the monitors returned to alarming beeps. Even the most confident doctors were beginning to show signs of doubt, their usual composure replaced by a tension that made them pace, muttering under their breaths. Meanwhile, in a different part of the hospital, life went on in ways most people never saw. The hallways were filled with patients from all walks of life. People waiting for routine checkups sat alongside those with urgent emergencies. Among them was a young girl named Amara. She was only 16, with dark, shining eyes that seemed to notice everything, even the small details most people overlooked. Her skin bore the warm hue of her African heritage, and her hair, tightly coiled, was pulled back neatly. She came from a neighborhood that struggled with poverty, where opportunities were scarce and dreams often felt out of reach. Amara's life had been full of challenges, but she had learned to navigate them with resilience. She knew the value of observing carefully, of understanding people and situations beyond what appeared on the surface. Her mother often said that Amara had a gift for noticing the little things that others ignored. Today, that gift would bring her closer to a world she had only glimpsed from afar, a world of wealth, privilege, and desperation. She was at the hospital because her younger brother had fallen sick. The hospital was crowded, but she moved calmly, holding her brother's hand, whispering encouragements to him that made his small body relax. While she waited, her eyes wandered around the emergency room. She noticed the frantic energy near the neonatal ward, the hurried steps of nurses, and the tense expressions on doctors' faces. Something about it caught her attention, a feeling that told her something extraordinary was happening. Amara did not know the full story, but her curiosity and empathy pulled her closer to the source of the commotion. She stood at the edge of a hallway where she could see a little beyond the double doors. Inside, she glimpsed the tiny form of the baby, the wires connected to the incubator, and the worried faces of people who clearly cared deeply. There was fear there, yes, but there was also something else, a determination that refused to give in, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. In the world outside the hospital, Samuel Hargrove was used to controlling outcomes. If he wanted a building built, it was built. If he wanted an event organized, it was perfect down to the smallest detail. But this situation was beyond control. Here, the rules of life and death were not determined by money or influence. Samuel's hands shook slightly as he looked at his wife, seeing the same desperation reflected in her eyes. They had faced challenges before, but this felt different. It felt like staring into an abyss that would not allow them to reach the other side without help from a source they could not command. The doctors continued their rounds, adjusting monitors, checking vital signs, and consulting each other in low, urgent tones. "Doctor." Phillips, one of the senior neonatologists, wiped his forehead, a gesture he rarely allowed himself in front of patients' families. "We're doing everything we can," he said, voice calm but strained. "But this is unusual. The baby isn't responding as expected." Victoria Hargrove's hands tightened around her husband's. "Is there nothing else we can try?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Every word was filled with hope and fear tangled together. Samuel shook his head, unable to speak. The truth was that even for someone like him, some battles were not won by wealth. This was one of them. Meanwhile, Amara continued to watch quietly from her vantage point. She noticed things the busy adults did not. A small change in the baby's breathing pattern, a flicker in the monitor that others dismissed, a slight pallor in the baby's skin that suggested more than the doctors realized. These details, combined with her natural curiosity and intuition, made her heart ache for the tiny life struggling to survive. She did not fully understand the medical science behind it, but she understood life, struggle, and the urgency of attention when someone is suffering. Her presence went unnoticed by most, but one nurse, noticing the intensity in her eyes, paused for a moment. "Are you okay, dear?" she asked softly. Amara nodded, too focused to answer fully. "Just watching," she said quietly, and that was all. The hours dragged on, each one filled with a tense rhythm of hope and despair. Samuel and Victoria alternated between holding each other, pacing the room, and speaking softly to their child. The hospital staff worked tirelessly, exhausted but relentless, driven by duty and compassion. But the baby's condition remained precarious, and with each passing minute, the fear that nothing could save the child grew heavier. Amara, still observing, began to feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility, not because she was part of the wealthy world inside the ward, but because she believed in the value of life, in the power of noticing what others overlooked, and in the idea that even someone from humble beginnings could make a difference. She did not yet know how, but something inside her told her that she could not simply watch and do nothing. Outside the hospital, the city moved on unaware. Cars rushed along busy streets, people sipped coffee in cafes, and life followed its usual rhythm. But inside St. Gabriel's hospital, time seemed suspended. Every beep of the monitor, every whispered conversation, every hesitant step of a doctor carried the weight of a life hanging in the balance. The contrast between the outside world and the small, crowded room where the baby fought for survival could not have been more stark. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the hospital floor, Amara's mind raced with questions and ideas. She thought about the remedies her grandmother had taught her, the small ways of noticing patterns in nature, and the wisdom that often comes from experience rather than textbooks. She wondered if any of it could be useful here, if her perspective, so different from the doctor's, might see something they could not. It was in that moment that Amara realized she could no longer remain a passive observer. Something inside her stirred, a combination of empathy, courage, and an unshakable belief that every life mattered, no matter how tiny, no matter the circumstances. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, determined to do whatever she could to help. Little did she know, this small step, taken in quiet courage and unwavering hope, would set in motion a chain of events that none of the billionaires, doctors, or even she herself could have anticipated. It was the beginning of a story that would challenge assumptions, break down barriers, and ultimately change lives in ways everyone thought impossible. Amara stepped cautiously into the hallway leading toward the neonatal ward, her heart pounding as she moved closer to the source of the commotion. She had never been this close to such a world before, a world where life hung by the thinnest of threads, where wealth and influence seemed both meaningless and powerful at the same time. The white walls, the smell of antiseptic, the steady hum of machines, and the occasional sharp beep of alarms created an atmosphere that was both tense and surreal. The baby's cries, or rather the faint, almost imperceptible sounds it made, reached her ears, and she felt a tug in her chest she could not ignore. Most children her age would have turned away, overwhelmed by fear or the stark reality of sickness. But Amara felt the opposite. She felt a calling, an inner voice urging her to pay attention, to notice the details that others might miss. Doctors and nurses bustled past her without a second glance. They were in constant motion, checking charts, adjusting IV drips, and whispering medical terms that were like music to their trained ears, but completely foreign to anyone else. Yet Amara noticed something different. While the adults were focused on machines and data, she was observing patterns. The way the baby's tiny fingers moved, the faint color shifts in its skin, and even the way the incubator light reflected off its fragile body. She crouched slightly to get a better look, keeping herself out of the way. A nurse walked by, noticing her again. "Are you supposed to be here?" the woman asked gently, a hint of concern in her voice. Amara shook her head. "I'm just watching." "I won't bother anyone," she said softly. The nurse studied her for a moment, then nodded and walked away, leaving her alone with the sight that held her attention so completely. Meanwhile, inside the room, the tension had grown heavier. Doctor Phillips and his team had been consulting for hours, trying to decide the next step. Each test they ran, each intervention they attempted, seemed to bring only temporary stability before the monitors began beeping erratically again. It was exhausting work, physically and emotionally, and the strain was visible on their faces. Even the most seasoned doctors sometimes struggled to hide their frustration when faced with something so unpredictable. Samuel Hargrove stood beside the incubator, his fingers entwined with Victoria's, gripping them almost desperately. The billionaire's usual confidence, the sense that he could control every outcome with money or influence, was gone. Here in this small, quiet room filled with machines and soft alarms, he felt powerless. Victoria's eyes were red-rimmed from hours of worry, and she whispered prayers under her breath, hoping against hope for a miracle. Amara watched them, noticing something subtle yet powerful. The fear, the love, the desperation, and the hope, all mixed together in their every movement and expression. She had seen hardship in her own life, had witnessed struggle and resilience in her neighborhood, but this was different. This was a battle she could see in real time, a struggle where even the richest and most powerful human beings had to confront the limits of control. As she observed, a thought occurred to her, a small idea that had been shaped by years of listening to her grandmother's advice about noticing patterns in nature and people. Her grandmother had often told her that sometimes solutions could come from observing carefully, from paying attention to details that others dismissed. Amara realized she had been doing that instinctively for hours now, noting things others ignored. She noticed the way the baby's tiny chest rose unevenly, the slight irregularity in the heartbeat on the monitor, and the almost imperceptible change in skin color when the baby tried to breathe. Her mind raced. She did not yet understand all the medical complexities involved, but she sensed there was something crucial being overlooked. Something simple, something human, something no machine or textbook could teach. And she felt deep down that she could help, not because she had any official authority, but because she was willing to trust what she saw and what she knew from life experience. While she stood there, a nurse came over to adjust the baby's position. The infant whimpered, tiny hands curling into fists, and Amara's heart clenched. She wanted to do something, anything, but she reminded herself to be careful. She could not just rush in, yet she could not remain silent either. She had to speak to try, even if no one took her seriously. Finally, gathering her courage, she stepped closer to the doctors and spoke in a voice that was calm but firm. "Excuse me," she said. I think I noticed something." "Maybe it could help." The doctors paused, looking at her with surprise, some with mild irritation. One of them, Dr. Phillips, raised an eyebrow. "And who might you be?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. "My name is Amara," she replied. I don't know all the medical terms, but I noticed a few things about the baby that might be important." She hesitated, then added, "I just want to help." For a moment, silence filled the room. Samuel and Victoria looked at her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, hope, and skepticism. The medical staff exchanged glances, some smiling politely, others clearly doubtful. In their world, solutions came from training, experience, and resources, not from a teenage girl observing quietly in the corner. But desperation has a way of softening skepticism. Samuel spoke first, his voice low but commanding. "Please, anything that could help, tell us," he said. Victoria nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, silently urging the girl to speak. Amara took a deep breath, trying to calm the rapid beat of her heart. She shared what she had observed. The slight unevenness in the baby's breathing, the way certain movements seemed to coincide with a drop in oxygen levels, and the subtle changes in skin color that might indicate a need for a different approach. She suggested a few small adjustments, Ways of positioning, gentle techniques she had learned from caring for her younger brother and listening to advice from elders in her community. At first, the doctors were hesitant. Their training told them to follow strict procedures, to rely on data and technology, not intuition or observation from someone without formal qualifications. But as they listened carefully, they realized she had noticed details that their instruments had not fully captured. It was a perspective they had overlooked. Dr. Phillips exchanged a look with a junior doctor. "It's unusual," he admitted, "but the details she's pointing out, they're worth considering." Slowly, carefully, the team began to incorporate her observations into their care. They adjusted the baby's position slightly, monitored responses to the tiniest changes, and watched closely as the infant reacted. As the minutes passed, something remarkable began to happen. The baby's breathing, previously erratic, started to stabilize just slightly at first. The monitors beeped more evenly, and the tension in the room eased just a fraction. Samuel's jaw loosened, and Victoria let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. Even the doctors allowed themselves a small, hopeful glance at the tiny life before them. Amara remained focused, standing quietly at the side of the incubator, her mind alert to every detail. She could see that her suggestions were helping, that her observations, though simple, intuitive, and born from life experience rather than formal training, were making a real difference. The baby's tiny chest rose more steadily, the skin color improved, and the irregularity in its movements decreased. No one in the room spoke at first, as if afraid to break the fragile thread of hope forming. Then Dr. Phillips spoke, his voice soft but full of acknowledgement. "She's right," he said. "These small changes, they're working." Samuel and Victoria looked at Amara, astonishment and gratitude in their eyes. The girl who had been invisible to most of the hospital staff had become the center of attention, the source of hope in a room that had felt hopeless only moments ago. Hours passed as the doctors continued their work, now guided in part by Amara's keen observations. The baby's condition slowly improved, small but significant changes that made all the difference. The monitors no longer beeped with frantic alarms, and a sense of cautious optimism began to replace the fear that had filled the room earlier. Outside the neonatal ward, the hospital continued to operate in its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet miracle unfolding inside. But inside, a young girl from a disadvantaged neighborhood had shown that courage, empathy, and careful observation could be as powerful as the most advanced medical technology. She had reminded everyone present that sometimes solutions come from unexpected places, from perspectives that challenge assumptions and bring hope when all seems lost. By evening, the baby's condition had stabilized further. Samuel and Victoria, exhausted but grateful, thanked Amara profusely, still struggling to comprehend how someone so young and from such a different world had been able to notice what even the most experienced doctors had missed. The doctors, too, expressed a quiet respect, acknowledging that sometimes intuition and observation were as valuable as years of study and experience. Amara, tired but fulfilled, realized that her presence and attention had mattered. She had made a difference, not through wealth, status, or authority, but through empathy, careful observation, and courage. And though she could not yet know the full journey that lay ahead, she felt a quiet sense of purpose growing inside her, a belief that she could face challenges, help others, and change lives in ways that few might expect. Little did anyone know this was only the beginning. The bond formed in those moments, the connection between a young girl, a struggling baby, and a family desperate for hope, would set the stage for events that none of them could have imagined, events that would challenge social barriers, expectations, and the true meaning of courage. The evening had settled over the city, casting long, soft shadows across the hospital walls. Inside the neonatal ward, the atmosphere was still tense, though now there was a flicker of hope. The baby's breathing had stabilized slightly, thanks to the small observations Amara had pointed out earlier. Yet the doctors knew that the condition was still critical. Any sudden change could send the tiny body into a dangerous spiral. Amara remained near the incubator, her eyes constantly scanning the baby's every movement. She could see the rhythm of its breathing, the faint rise and fall of its chest, and the way its tiny fingers twitched almost automatically. Hours of observation had taught her patience and attentiveness. She was learning to trust her instincts and to see patterns that others might miss. Dr. Phillips and his team continued their careful work. They adjusted equipment, monitored the baby's oxygen levels, and consulted charts filled with data. Yet despite their best efforts, the baby was still far from safe. Samuel and Victoria hovered anxiously nearby, their hands often clasped over one another, whispering prayers and words of encouragement. The parents' wealth could buy comfort and care, but it could not guarantee life. As the evening deepened, Amara noticed something unusual. The baby's breathing, though steadier, was not entirely regular. There was a faint pause at intervals, barely perceptible, but enough to suggest a deeper problem. The doctors had focused on the visible data from the machines, but she remembered her grandmother's advice. Sometimes, what you see is only part of the story. Patterns can exist beyond charts and graphs, and subtle signals can hold the key to understanding. Amara spoke up again, her voice calm but determined. "I think there's something else we need to try," she said. The doctors turned to her, eyebrows raised in surprise and skepticism. Dr. Phillips said, "And what exactly is that, young lady? We've tried everything standard protocol recommends." "I know," Amara replied softly, "but I think the way the baby is positioned and the way it is being soothed might need to change. I've seen this help with my brother when he was very sick. I can try something just small, something gentle." The room fell silent. Samuel and Victoria exchanged glances, a mixture of hope and caution flickering across their faces. The doctors whispered among themselves, unsure whether to dismiss her suggestion or to take a chance. For a moment, it seemed as though no one would act. But then Samuel, driven by desperation, stepped forward. "Do it," he said firmly. "If it helps, just try it." His voice carried both authority and vulnerability. Victoria nodded, tears glistening in her eyes as if silently begging the girl to save her child. Amara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She approached the incubator carefully, washing her hands and following the hospital's strict hygiene rules. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her mind was steady. She remembered the small lessons from her neighborhood: gentle touch, patience, observation, and trust in what she knew. She adjusted the baby's position slowly, tilting the tiny body just slightly, ensuring the head was aligned to allow easier breathing. She hummed a soft, steady tune, the kind she had learned from her grandmother, a tune that seemed to calm the smallest children. The baby's eyelids flickered, tiny fingers curling, and for the first time in hours, it seemed to respond to something beyond the machines. The doctors watched, initially unsure, then fascinated. The baby's chest rose and fell more evenly, the faint pauses Amara had noticed earlier beginning to disappear. She adjusted again, shifting just a little, speaking softly all the while. The monitors reflected subtle but important improvements, and even the most skeptical doctors could not deny that the changes were real. Samuel and Victoria held their breath as they watched, emotions swirling between hope and fear. The baby's tiny cries began to soften, and its body seemed to relax. Amara's actions were slow, careful, and deliberate, every movement calculated with love and attention. She had taken a step no one else had thought of, relying not on formal training but on observation, intuition, and care learned from life itself. As the night wore on, Amara continued her gentle intervention. She adjusted the baby's blankets, monitored the slightest changes in breathing, and ensured that the little one's comfort was prioritized. "Doctor." Phillips began to guide her subtly, asking questions, suggesting minor adjustments, but it was clear that the initiative and main insight were hers. The balance between professional care and intuitive understanding was creating a new path for the baby's survival. Hours passed, and the baby's condition steadily improved. The beeping monitors became more consistent, the tiny chest rose and fell rhythmically, and the faint pauses that had once caused alarm were now almost gone. Samuel could hardly believe his eyes. He had never seen a moment like this in his life. A child, seemingly beyond help, responding to the care of someone so young, so unexpected. Victoria clutched his hand, tears streaming silently, feeling an overwhelming mix of relief and gratitude. Amara, exhausted but determined, did not notice the passage of time. Her focus remained on the baby, watching every subtle movement, every slight shift in color or breathing. Her observations, combined with gentle interventions, were creating results that had seemed impossible just hours before. The doctors began to whisper to one another, acknowledging that perhaps expertise alone was not enough, that sometimes solutions emerged from perspectives outside conventional knowledge. The hospital staff, initially wary, now looked on with respect. The young girl from a disadvantaged neighborhood had demonstrated courage, intelligence, and compassion in ways they had never seen before. Her actions had bridged a gap between worlds, between wealth and poverty, between professional training and lived experience, between hopelessness and hope. By midnight, the baby's vital signs had stabilized enough that the doctors could declare a small but significant victory. Samuel and Victoria allowed themselves a smile, their exhaustion tempered by relief. They approached Amara, who had been quietly observing, and knelt beside her in gratitude. "You saved our child," Victoria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." Samuel's voice was steady but filled with awe. "We will never forget this. You have given us a gift beyond anything money could buy." Amara shook her head, humble and quiet. "I just wanted to help," she said. I noticed things, that's all. I didn't do anything special." But the sincerity in her words did not diminish the truth. Her courage, her willingness to act, and her observations had made the difference between life and death. The doctors approached her, offering nods of respect and acknowledgement. "Doctor." Philip spoke gently. "You've reminded us that sometimes insight can come from unexpected places. We can't explain everything, but we can see that your intuition and care mattered." Amara felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet sense of pride mixed with relief. She had acted in the face of uncertainty, and her actions had saved a life. Throughout the night, the hospital settled into a calmer rhythm. The baby slept peacefully, breathing steadily, and for the first time in hours, the room felt less like a battlefield and more like a place of hope. Samuel and Victoria took turns sitting near the incubator, holding hands and occasionally whispering to the child, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace. Amara finally allowed herself a small breath of relief. She had acted on instinct and observation, using what she knew from life, love, and care. She had bridged a gap between worlds, showing that courage and attention could change outcomes even in the most critical situations. Her heart swelled with quiet satisfaction, knowing she had done something meaningful, something that mattered. As the night deepened, word began to spread quietly within the hospital about the girl who had saved the billionaire's baby. Staff shared the story with hushed admiration, and even the most skeptical began to reconsider assumptions about who could make a difference. Amara's presence, once unnoticed, had become a symbol of hope, courage, and the extraordinary impact of simple, careful observation. By the early hours of the morning, the baby's condition was stable enough to allow the doctors to step back and observe without immediate intervention. Samuel and Victoria thanked the doctors and Amara repeatedly, their gratitude almost overflowing. The young girl, tired but unshaken, knew that this night would be remembered not for wealth or status, but for courage, care, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. Amara's actions had done more than save a life. They had challenged assumptions, bridged social divides, and demonstrated that empathy and careful attention could create miracles in unexpected ways. Her courage had transformed despair into hope, showing everyone present that sometimes the most powerful interventions come not from authority or resources, but from heart, observation, and courage. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight filtering into the hospital room, Amara sat quietly, reflecting on the night's events. She had acted when it mattered most, and the baby's life had been given a chance to continue. She realized that her perspective, shaped by a life of observation, resilience, and empathy, had been as vital as any machine or medical procedure. And in that quiet moment, she knew that her journey was only beginning. She had proven to herself and to others that courage and insight could transcend social boundaries, and that even the smallest voice could create extraordinary change. The city was waking up slowly as the first rays of morning sun spilled across the streets, casting a golden light through the hospital windows. Inside the neonatal ward, a calmness had replaced the tense energy of the previous night. The baby, who had seemed so fragile just hours ago, now lay peacefully in the incubator, breathing steadily and showing signs of strength returning. The monitors, once filled with frantic alarms, now emitted gentle, steady beeps, marking the rhythm of life that had been so uncertain. Samuel and Victoria Hargrove sat beside the incubator, exhaustion painted on their faces, but their eyes glowed with gratitude and relief. They had watched, hour after hour, as their child fought against a condition that had seemed insurmountable. And now, the tiny miracle in front of them was proof that hope had not been in vain. Yet neither of them could fully explain how the tide had turned. The doctors had been competent, the hospital well-equipped, but it was the courage of a young girl, unexpected and untrained in formal medicine, that had made the difference. Amara sat quietly near the incubator, her small frame almost lost in the vast, brightly lit room. She was tired, physically and emotionally drained from the intensity of the night, but a warm sense of fulfillment filled her chest. She had acted when no one else had thought to do so, guided not by textbooks or authority, but by observation, intuition, and a deep care for life itself. Her actions had changed the outcome, and she felt a quiet pride in that accomplishment. The hospital staff began their morning rounds, moving with a mixture of relief and admiration. Nurses whispered to one another about the young girl who had made a difference, and even some of the doctors offered nods of respect. "Doctor." Phillips approached Amara, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You've done something extraordinary," he said gently. "What you did last night, it's not something we see every day. You reminded us that sometimes life-saving insights come from places we least expect." Amara smiled shyly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I just wanted to help," she said softly. "I didn't think it would make such a difference." But in truth, she had known deep down that noticing small details, paying attention, and having the courage to act could matter. Her observations had been simple yet precise, and her actions had been gentle but deliberate. That combination had brought the baby back from the brink. Samuel and Victoria joined Dr. Phillips, their expressions full of gratitude. "We will never forget what you did," Samuel said, his voice low but filled with emotion. "You gave our child a chance at life that we feared was gone. How can we ever thank you?" Victoria's eyes glistened with tears as she added, "You've done more than save our baby. You've shown us the power of courage and hope. We will always remember your kindness." Amara shook her head again, humility shining in her gaze. "I didn't do it for thanks," she said. "I just wanted to help, that's all." But those words, quiet as they were, did not diminish the impact of her actions. Everyone in the room understood that the courage of one young girl had changed the course of a life, and perhaps even more than one life indirectly, as the story of her bravery began to spread quietly through the hospital. In the following days, the baby continued to recover steadily. Each day brought small improvements, a more consistent heartbeat, better breathing patterns, and a growing strength that could be felt in the tiny movements of its arms and legs. The medical team continued to monitor the infant, but the panic that had gripped the hospital only a short time ago had faded. Hope had taken its place, steady and warm. Amara became an unexpected hero in the eyes of the staff and the Hargrove family. Samuel insisted that she be recognized formally, inviting her to visit his home so that he could personally thank her. He spoke with a sincerity that carried weight, offering resources, opportunities, and support, not as a reward, but as a gesture of deep respect. "You've shown us something priceless," he said. "Your courage and your care have saved our child. That is a gift no money could ever buy." But for Amara, the recognition was not about wealth or status. She felt a deeper reward. The knowledge that she had acted in alignment with her values, that she had trusted her observations, and that her willingness to step forward had created a real difference. That feeling of purpose, that understanding that even one person could make a monumental impact, filled her with a sense of empowerment she had never known before. As word of Amara's actions spread quietly, it began to reach people outside the hospital. Her story was shared among nurses, doctors, and patients, and eventually found its way into local news and social media. People were inspired by the courage of a young girl from a humble background who had acted decisively when life hung in the balance. She had demonstrated that wisdom and compassion could emerge from any walk of life, and that the power to save a life did not depend on wealth, status, or training alone. The Hargrove family became close to Amara, treating her with kindness and respect. They learned about her life, her neighborhood, and the challenges she faced growing up. Samuel and Victoria were struck by her resilience and her deep sense of empathy, qualities that had allowed her to act decisively in the neonatal ward. They made it clear that they wanted to support her dreams, whether in education, opportunities, or personal growth, knowing that someone with such heart and courage had the potential to create change far beyond this single moment. Amara, despite the attention and admiration, remained grounded. She continued her studies, helped her family, and maintained her humility. Yet the experience had left a lasting mark on her. She knew that life could be unpredictable, that crises could arise suddenly, and that courage, paired with careful observation and a willingness to act, could make a difference when it mattered most. She also learned that recognition, while appreciated, was not the goal. The goal was life, hope, and the knowledge that one person could indeed change outcomes. The baby, now stronger and healthier, became a symbol of resilience and the unexpected power of care. Samuel and Victoria watched their child grow with a mixture of awe and gratitude, never forgetting the young girl who had intervened when all seemed lost. They often shared the story with friends, colleagues, and family, emphasizing the lesson that true courage could appear in the most unexpected forms and places. Months passed, and Amara's life continued, enriched by the experience but rooted in her familiar routines. She returned to school, continued to care for her younger brother, and maintained her sense of curiosity and empathy. Yet she carried with her a quiet confidence that had grown from knowing she could act decisively in a critical moment. That confidence influenced every decision she made, every interaction she had, and every challenge she faced. The story of Amara and the Hargrove baby became an inspiration for others in the community as well. Local schools and organizations recognized her bravery and initiative, inviting her to speak about courage, empathy, and the importance of paying attention to details. Young people listened, inspired by someone who had come from humble beginnings and yet had achieved something extraordinary through observation, care, and decisive action. Even the medical community took notice. Doctors and nurses reflected on the events of that night, considering how valuable different perspectives could be, especially those rooted in lived experience rather than formal training alone. They realized that sometimes the answers to difficult problems could come from unexpected sources, and that humility and openness to new ideas could save lives. Amara herself remained humble, insisting that she had only done what anyone with compassion might have done. But everyone around her knew differently. They knew that what she had done required bravery, insight, and a willingness to step into the unknown. She had challenged assumptions about who could make a difference, and in doing so had shown that courage and empathy could transcend barriers of wealth, status, and age. Years later, the Hargrove family continued to honor the bond formed during that critical night. The baby, now thriving and healthy, grew up with the story of Amara as part of their family history, a reminder of the power of courage, intuition, and care. Samuel and Victoria ensured that the story was preserved, not as a tale of wealth or privilege, but as a testament to the extraordinary impact one person could have on the life of another. Amara's journey did not end with that night in the hospital. She continued to grow, to learn, and to help others wherever she could. Her experience became a guiding force in her life, shaping her values, choices, and aspirations. She understood that courage and compassion were not limited by age, background, or circumstance. They were choices made in the moment, often quietly, and sometimes with far-reaching consequences. In the end, the story of the billionaire's baby and the young girl who saved it became more than just a tale of life and death. It became a story about human connection, the importance of empathy, and the power of paying attention when it matters most. It showed that the smallest voice could make the biggest difference, that courage could emerge from the humblest places, and that hope could thrive even in the darkest moments. Amara's actions reminded everyone that life is fragile, but that hope, empathy, and courage are powerful forces capable of changing destinies. Her story would continue to inspire generations, a testament to the extraordinary impact one young girl could have when she acted with love, observation, and unwavering courage. And in the quiet moments when the hospital was still, when the baby slept peacefully in its crib, and when Amara reflected on her journey, she knew one simple truth. Even the smallest acts of courage, rooted in care and attention, could ripple outward in ways no one could predict, creating change, hope, and life where it seemed impossible.